when a German Shepherd puppy wrapped his tiny paws around Mark's arm and refused to let go. It wasn't just cute, it was a desperate plea. What happened next revealed a heartbreaking truth and left everyone in tears. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The rain had stopped just an hour before Mark pulled into the shelter's gravel parking lot. Inside, the shelter buzzed with the chorus of hopeful barks and yips. Mark strolled, slowly reading the tags clipped to the kennel doors. He offered polite smiles and quick scratches to the more eager dogs, but his steps slowed when he reached the far end. There, behind the last set of metal bars, sat a small German Shepherd puppy. He wasn't barking or bouncing. He just sat quietly, his big brown eyes fixed on Mark as if measuring him. His tail gave the slightest twitch, not quite a wag, but enough to make Mark pause. Something about this one felt different. Mark crouched down in front of the kennel, lowering himself to the puppy's level. "Hey there, little guy," he said softly, his voice barely carrying over the muffled sounds of barking from down the hall. The puppy tilted his head, ears perking forward, but stayed seated. Slowly, Mark extended his hand through the gap in the bars. The puppy hesitated for a moment, then crept forward on unsteady paws, sniffing cautiously. His warm breath tickled Mark's fingers, and then, without warning, he pressed his tiny muzzle into Mark's palm. Mark smiled, feeling the soft fur against his skin. He began to scratch gently behind the puppy's ears, earning a small sigh of contentment. And then it happened. The puppy lifted his front paws and wrapped them tightly around Mark's wrist, holding on with surprising strength. Mark chuckled at first, thinking it was just playful curiosity, but the puppy didn't let go. His grip was firm, almost desperate, his eyes locked on Mark's, as if trying to communicate something words never could. In that instant, the bustling shelter around them seemed to fade. It was just Mark and this tiny German Shepherd, connected by a silent plea neither of them fully understood. Yet Mark tried to ease his wrist free, but the puppy only tightened his hold, small claws pressing gently against his skin. It wasn't rough or aggressive. It was as if he was saying, "Don't go, please." The look in the puppy's eyes stopped Mark cold. They weren't the wide, curious eyes of a playful pup. They were deep, almost mournful, shimmering with something that felt heartbreakingly human. A voice broke the moment. "That one's been here a while," said a shelter attendant, walking over. She knelt beside Mark and lowered her voice. "He was found alone on the side of the road. No siblings, no mother. We think someone abandoned him." Mark glanced back at the puppy who still hadn't let go. The thought of him sitting alone in a cold ditch made Mark's chest ache. "He's been like this with a few people," the attendant continued, "but when they leave, he cries. 4 hours. He doesn't want to be alone again." Mark swallowed hard, feeling an unexpected lump in his throat. He gently stroked the puppy's head, his voice low and steady. "I'm not leaving you, buddy. Not yet." and deep down he already knew walking away might be impossible. Mark looked up at the attendant. "Can I take him out for a walk?" "Of course," as she said with a small smile, unlocking the kennel door. The moment it swung open, the puppy hesitated, glancing between Mark and the doorway as if unsure it was real. Mark clipped on the tiny leash, giving it a gentle tug. "Come on, let's see the world outside." Slowly the puppy stepped forward, his paws making soft taps on the shelter floor. Outside, the air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of damp grass. At first, the puppy stayed glued to Mark's side, his small body brushing against his leg with every step. His head tilted up every few seconds, checking to make sure Mark was still there. As they reached a patch of open grass, the puppy's tail gave a hesitant wag. He sniffed the ground, then looked back at Mark before bounding a few playful steps ahead. Mark couldn't help but laugh at the sudden burst of energy, but every time Mark slowed, the puppy would immediately stop and return to his side, leaning gently against his leg as if to say, "Don't go too far. I need you here." Back inside, Mark crouched to unzip the leash, but the puppy immediately pressed against his leg, refusing to step back into the kennel. His small paws gripped the floor, and when Mark gently guided him forward, he let out a soft whine that pierced straight through his chest. "I want to adopt him," Mark said, glancing at the attendant. Her expression softened, but she shook her head slightly. "He still needs his final medical checks and vaccinations. It'll be a few days before he's cleared to go home." A few days to Mark, it felt like a lifetime. He looked down at the puppy, who was now sitting with his head resting on Mark's shoe, eyes heavy with worry. Mark sighed and scratched behind his ears. "I'll come back for you," he promised, quietly. When he finally stood and turned toward the door, the puppy sprang up, pressing his paws against the kennel bars, tail whipping in panic. His cries followed Mark down the hall, echoing through the shelter until the door shut behind him. Driving away, Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He couldn't shake the image of those tiny paws holding on to him, begging him not to leave. The next few days crawled by at a pace that tested Mark's patience. Every morning before work, he called the shelter, asking the same question, "Is he ready yet?" And every day the answer was the same, "Not yet." At night, Mark found himself replaying that first meeting in his head. He could still feel the puppy's small paws wrapped around his arm, the weight of that silent plea. He even caught himself glancing at the empty dog bed he'd pulled from his garage, already set up in the corner of his living room. By the fourth day, the anticipation was almost unbearable. When his phone finally rang that afternoon, he didn't even wait for the second ring before answering. "Mark, it was the shelter attendant. He's cleared. You can come get him today." Mark was already grabbing his keys. "I'm on my way." The drive felt longer than it should have, his heart thudding with every passing mile. In the passenger seats had a small bag of toys, a new leash, and a blanket. Everything he'd been holding on to, waiting for this moment. Today he thought there would be no kennel door between them. Today the puppy was going home. The moment Mark stepped into the shelter, he heard it. A sharp, excited bark from the far end of the hall. Heads turned, but Mark knew exactly who it was. Melissa, the attendant, grinned. He's been restless all morning. I think he knew you were coming. Mark walked quickly toward the kennel, and there he was, the little German Shepherd puppy, tail wagging so hard it made his whole body wiggle. The second their eyes met, the puppy let out a high-pitched bark and pressed himself against the bars, paws reaching out for Mark's arm. Mark knelt and, just like before, the puppy wrapped his tiny paws around his wrist. But this time, it wasn't a desperate plea. It was pure joy. The adoption paperwork was a blur. Moments later, Melissa handed Mark the leash. Take good care of him. Mark clipped it on, and the puppy trotted proudly beside him toward the exit, stopping only once to look back. Just a quick glance, as if to say goodbye to the place that had been his temporary home. When the sunlight hit them outside, Mark smiled. Come on, Shadow, he said, trying the name out loud. The puppy barked once, as if in approval. The ride home was quiet except for the soft sound of Shadow's breathing from the passenger seat. He sat on the blanket Mark brought, occasionally glancing up at him with those big brown eyes, as if making sure this wasn't just another temporary stop. When they arrived, Shadow hopped out cautiously, sniffing the yard before following Mark inside. Every corner of the house became a new adventure. He padded through the living room, peeked into the kitchen, and even stuck his nose into the laundry basket. By evening, he had chosen his favorite spot, curled up in the dog bed Mark had prepared days earlier. From there, he could see both the front door and Mark's chair, a perfect vantage point for a dog who didn't want to miss a thing. Over the next week, Shadow followed Mark everywhere, down the hall, into the yard, even waiting patiently outside the shower. It didn't take long for Mark to realize the name Shadow was more than fitting. One night, as Shadow lay at his feet, Mark leaned down and whispered, "You're home now for good." The puppy lifted his head, tail thumping softly as if he already knew, and for the first time, neither of them felt alone. If you were moved by this incredible story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay with us for more heartwarming and unbelievable stories.